Hello! Today I want to talk about representing visual information.
Architecture. Architecture.
So when we talk about graphic design, or when we talk about representing information, it's all with the goal of transmitting data from the maker to the viewer. So for example, when you're making a map, you're trying to convey a sense of space, boundaries, locales, things like that. A book is transmitting ideas, words, phrases from the writer to the reader. And so in both of these examples, the visual component is really important, and there's a whole bunch of things that can either help or hinder that goal of getting information from one person to another. And I'm going to borrow some research from Edward Tufte. This is a book called Envisioning Information. It's a wonderful book. It is more on the pricey side, but I highly recommend if you can find a PDF of it somewhere. It's so great. It describes so much about graphic design in detail. And one of the things Edward Tufte talks about is called chart junk. And chart junk is just graphic components or elements that are completely irrelevant to the data being conveyed. It kind of confuses the viewer, decreases the clarity, and is just overall not the best. And so we're trying to avoid chart junk, and I'm going to adapt that word, and today I want to talk about chart stuff. So these are elements or components of a graphic design that help the viewer understand what's going on. They're contextual, they help the reader see, they help the viewer understand what's going on. So I just want to go through 4 examples, and then we're going to go into InDesign, and I'm going to give you a brief tutorial on how to reconstruct the last example that I have for you. So the first one is an architectural drawing. This is a very common construction document. I've redacted some of the information on the right side just for the privacy of the drawing maker. But I just wanted to start off with this one because obviously it relates to the topic we're talking about, which is architecture. And so if we remove all of the, what I'm going to call the body of this drawing, we are left with this chart stuff that I'm talking about. So I'll just go through each element of these individually to kind of give you guys a better idea of what I'm talking about. So on the right side we have, this is what's called a title block, referred to in the architecture field. It has the sheet number, the client name, address, the project number from the architect's office, a whole number of different things that help kind of contextualize this one drawing within the rest of the construction document set. So we have the title block, which in and of itself, as I mentioned, is ripe with chart stuff. We also have at the bottom left a north arrow, which some of you have already started to incorporate in your maps. That obviously helps orient the viewer to where polar north is. It kind of gives an idea of where the sunlight might be coming from. It's important in establishing it within the context of its larger site plan. Next we have scale, which we've talked about a lot. So we have a written scale, 3/16 equals a foot, and then also we have a visual scale. And then lastly we have the title. So 1, 2, 3, 4, all of these components are kind of helping to orient the viewer to what's going on, and that leaves us with again, the body, like I said here in blue. This is the data that changes. It's going to be different from page to page, whereas the chart stuff, this kind of yellow, is mostly going to remain the same. It's kind of this framework that the body of the drawing exists within. Let's look at another example. This is maybe a more simple example, not as relevant to this class. It's a book. So as you can imagine, the body is the text. So once we remove that, we're left with just a couple pieces, but still pretty important as you're flipping through. So on the left we have the title of the book, The Digital Mystique. We also have the title of the chapter, The Passion of the Web, and then of course on each side we have page numbers. So as I mentioned in the architectural drawing, the example prior, the chart stuff is going to change. Obviously page numbers are going to change as you turn the pages, but that framework is going to stay the same. So again, body in blue, and then framework in yellow. And you notice that I'm also highlighting the negative space, and I think it's really important to remember that lack of something is still an important aspect of design. It's sometimes called negative space. There's lots of different words for it. But just as the page numbers are developing a framework for how the information is contained, this negative space that is, you could also call the margins of this book, is kind of housing the text and giving the reader a sense of nice space on the page. It also gives space for your thumbs on either side as you're reading through, your fingers to hold it. So don't forget to consider the negative space, the margins, all of these things help make up a successful graphic design. The next example I want to show you, you may recognize. It is our syllabus for this class. Another fairly simple example, but I wanted to point out some more chart stuff. So we have the title of the course, the page number, and then on the right side we have a kind of graphic index of the pages, kind of an alternate page numbering system, so you can see as you're flipping through which page you're on in relation to the entire document. So again, body, which is the text, and then the chart stuff or the frame. Again, margins around the body is important. And the last example I have is probably the most relevant to this class. It's also the most intricate, so I've done a couple pullouts where I've zoomed in some of the elements so they're easier to see. This is a map. It's, I think it's 36 by 24 inches, so it's also the largest physical example of the 4 we've just looked at. And let's start to break it down. So right away I'm going to take out all of the body so we can just look at the framework or the chart stuff. So there we go. You can see in this example there is a frame around it which some of the title and supporting text fits inside. So you can't always just take away everything that's inside of the border in this example. So the first element of chart stuff that I'm noticing here is this border around, that's sometimes referred to as a graticule. It offers a visual border for the map that's represented, and it also introduces a scale. So you can see in my zoomed in version we have longitude lines coming down. So that already is giving you a great sense of space and of scale and dimension. The next element of chart stuff are these supporting text down here, and they're really, really tiny, so I had to zoom them in. I believe they are authors on the left and right side, and then in the middle they have the publishing company and when this map was published. So we can see published by something A. Finley, 1825. So that's also really important in understanding where this document is coming from, who created it, who's publishing it, what day it's from. This is all really important information to have in your graphic designs. I also should note I'm ignoring some of the handwritten text down at the bottom. I believe this was scanned in from a library, so there's also some text about a call number. There's a little stamp that says it was in a locked cabinet. There's other supporting things that are not original to it, so I'm ignoring that. Next element is very large, is the title. It's in this wonderful script font. It says Map of the States of Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. So obviously titles are important in telling your reader what this is about. And then we also have some statistical, it's called a statistical table, and it just has kind of raw data about like census, how many people live there, of which demographic, how many square miles and acres are contained within this map, things like that. And again, we have a visual scale, so it's going from 0 to 100 miles, just showing us kind of a nice graphic representation of the scale. So we can see, shifting back to the body, there's tons of dense information captured here, and I think this relates back to the project we're working on now, which is why I wanted to show it to you last. And then in yellow we have kind of the framing elements, and you can see I even included the grid lines in the kind of the chart stuff going through the map, because I think that's an important intersection there between the body of the work and then the frame as well. Okay, now I'm going to walk you through a very brief tutorial, predominantly in InDesign, to show you how I would kind of recreate the map in the last example that we just saw. So firstly, I'm going to pull up an example map. This is something I showed you last week, just one of the hand-drawn maps. And I wanted to show you this in Photoshop because if you have a photo of your work and you want it to look a little more professional, or just make it look not like a photo, this is how I would do it. So I had this open in Photoshop. If you've never used Photoshop before, I highly encourage you to do some YouTube tutorials, or I can do some more tutorials in class because there's so much to know here, and I'm just barely not even scratching the surface. So I have our hand-drawn map open. I'm going to duplicate this layer just so we can come back and see what we started from. I would say the most important tool here is called Levels, which you can find in your Adjustments tab. If you have this little window open, it is, whoops, not Curves. It's called Levels, what is the icon? Oh, this little thing right here. You can also go to Image Adjustments and you'll find it there as well. This pop-out one is the one I usually use, but they're the same thing. What I'm going to do here is making sure I have the correct layer selected. I'll go to Adjustments, Levels, and then I just want to specify a new white point. So it's this little eyedropper with white inside of it. And essentially whatever color you click here is going to become the new white. Anything brighter than that will become white, and you'll see it'll like increase the brightness overall. So we have kind of this like beigey undertone here, so I'm just going to click on some different places until I'm happy. So you can see now we're kind of just eliminating the paper underneath. It doesn't really look like a photo anymore, which is what we're going for. But as you can see from the original, it's kind of become a little bit lighter. Our line quality is not as dark. So an easy way to fix that is just to duplicate this layer, duplicate. I just right clicked and said duplicate. And I'm gonna set it to a different blending mode. And blending mode is something I could talk for like half an hour about. But essentially the one I'm gonna use for today is called Multiply. It kind of adds the dark tones on top of whatever's under it. So since we have two layers, one of them is normal and the other one is multiply, you can see it's just kind of adding another layer of line work on top, which is really useful. So I'm going to save this as our map or our work, whatever you want to call it. I'll call this My Cool Map 1.0, and I'm going to save this as, you can save it as a Photoshop file, an image file like JPEG or PNG, it doesn't really matter. Save it as a PDF. InDesign handles different image formats really well. I'll do JPEG just for fun. Quality, I'm going to set to the maximum, and then I'm going to jump into InDesign. So the first thing I'm going to consider before doing my InDesign file is what orientation I want this to be. This hand-drawn map is portrait. It's taller than it is wide. So I'm going to make my InDesign file also portrait. So I'll go to File, New, Document, and adjust this to inches, but there's also millimeters, centimeters, agates, which I have no idea what that is. And just for fun, I'll do a standard size in the States, which is 11 by 17. But I'm doing portrait, so it's going to be 11 inches wide by 17 inches tall, and say create. There are some options for margins here, but I like to do that once my document is already created, so I'll just go ahead and hit create. It'll give me this lovely thing, and this interface is pretty similar to the other Adobe programs like Photoshop, if you're familiar. And I'm going to show you I'm going to walk you through some of the basic tools in InDesign that'll give you access to creating some of the chart stuff I was talking about earlier, some of that important contextual information. So I'm going to pull up, I'm going to do this to the side, and also pull up that one example we were looking at. Which was this map. So now we can kind of easily compare. I have my little slides here showing us the important pieces. So let's start with the border, which I called the Graticule. And you can see in InDesign, these pink and purple lines are already kind of specifying our margins. And you can turn those on and off by going into the View panel and going to, not hide rulers. Usually I like to keep my rulers on. That's this kind of like a built-in Graticule, actually, like a scaling system, so I like to keep those on. So these pink and purple lines are what's called guides in InDesign, and that represents your margins, and you can adjust those, and I can show you how to do that. And you can turn them on or off depending on whether they're helpful or not. There's sometimes a little icon under the Properties tab, or you can go to View and go to Grids and Guides, and you can say Hide Guides or Show Guides, and there's a shortcut for that that is shown here. Control plus colon. So to change those, you can go to File, Document Setup, or Alt-Control-P. And so now you can see you can have any number of pages. For today, I'm just going to stick to one. There's some more advanced functions that we can get into more if you're creating documents and you want page numbers to carry over and things like that. This InDesign program is very useful for that. But for right now, we're just going to start by adjusting the margins. So if you check this little preview button, it'll let you see your changes. So I'm going to go back to my map and just use that as a reference. It looks like I'll keep it at the standard. I think it was like half an inch of a margin. I think that's okay. So I'm going to hit OK. And so like I mentioned, the first element I'm interested in copying over is this border, or a graticule. And so to do that, it's just a couple of rectangles, and there's a pretty simple rectangle tool over here. So I'm going to draw one of those. And this, I think, just gives like a nice visual border. You do not have to do this, but like I said, for the purposes of showing you guys the tools and for kind of mimicking this map on the right side, this is what I'm going to do. So now I have a rectangle. You can't see it because it's white. You can see it in the layers. There's these three tabs at the top: Pages, Layers, and Links. So in the Layers tab, you can see it. And if I click on this little selection box, I can select it. But just to give it you can give it a color over here. You can kind of do your color picker thing. Now we can see we also give it a stroke. So you have, for most objects in InDesign, and this also goes for Illustrator as well, you have a fill and a stroke. And those are essentially what determine the appearance of your objects. So for stroke, I can give this black stroke of, let's say, 4 points, for example. So now we have an outlined rectangle. So back to this map, I'm going to do, this is white because I don't want it to be colored. So since this is a pretty quick simplification of our map on the right side, I'm just going to stick with one border, and that'll be that. If you wanted to add some like grid lines or scaling markers, you can see if I go back to the original, whoops, go back this way, there are some like latitude and longitude lines that carry through. I think that's really successful, so I'll show you guys how to do that. And to do that, I'm going to use my guides, which you can create more of by dragging from your rulers. So for example, if I click on this top and drag down, I've just created a guide. This is something that doesn't actually exist on the drawing. It's just a helpful line for you to kind of measure against. And it's also nice because in the properties it tells you exactly where it exists on the Y scale. So for example, if I wanted these grid lines to exist every, let's just say 2 inches, so I put the first one at 2. I'll do another one, this will be at 4. Another one at 6. 8. 10, you guys get the idea. 12. 14. And 16. Obviously, I would try to space these a little bit better if I were doing this for real, but since it's a tutorial, this will be fine. Okay, I'll do 2 on the x-axis, 2, or 2 inches apart on the x-axis, so we'll do 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 10. So now I want to do lines that connect those. So I'll just select the line tool over on this side, and my mouse will kind of automatically snap to the guides. And if I wanted to see my, oops, So again, we kind of run into a problem where these objects exist, but we can't quite see them just because there's some things going on. Again, you can see them in the layers. We have our 3 lines right here, but again, we cannot see them. So what I can do is either select them just in the layer panel. I can also use my mouse to select them if I lock our big rectangle. So if I were to do this without selecting, I'm just moving my rectangle around. So so in the layer panel, there's a visibility toggle and there's also a lock toggle. So I can click on this little empty box next to the eyeball icon and it'll lock it so that I'm not able to move it. And from there, I can click, drag, and now you can see in my layers panel, I have my 3 lines selected, and then I can all give them a stroke at the same time. And we talked about line weights a little bit, and it was in one of our, in the entry interview. But line weight is super important to conveying different types of information. So for example, we can see in our example, this grid, the border around the outside. These lines are pretty thick, especially if you look compared to these latitude and longitude lines. So I'm going to try to mimic that condition. So my outer box is 4 points. So I think I want my inner lines to be maybe like 1 or 2. So I'm going to select these, hit 2, whoops, not 21, 2 points. And then you can see the stroke is white, so we're not going to be able to see it yet. So I'll change it to black. And now I'm going to use the shortcut to hide our guides. Now we can see I've got some lines going vertically. And I think that's a little too dark, so I'm going to go down to 1. And then I'll just continue to keep drawing some. Okay, so now I have a nice semblance of a grid similar to this map over here. So now what I'm going to do is start to mimic some of the text at the bottom. You can see, oops, zoom out here. So this is the border, we just did that, as well as some of the latitude and longitude lines. So now I want to do this text at the bottom. So I can zoom in here, and then using this text type, or what is it called, type tool, essentially you click and drag to make a text box that you can type in. So if we're saying that the author is on the left side in our example, I'm going to type my name. Oops. Make sure you always have the text tool selected when you're typing, and then click inside of the box, Nathan Rennick. And from here, you can use this properties panel to select the font and all these other things, size, italicized, spacing, kerning, all kinds of fun stuff. But I'll just keep it pretty basic. This is Arial. What is this? 12-point font, I think. 12-point. And then, let's see, they have the publisher and the year in the middle. I'll just put the year, 2020. You can also specify text justification. And for example, if I know I want this to be my 2020, which should be right in the middle, you can kind of just drag it, and I'm holding down shift, so it's only letting me drag in one direction. If I let go of shift, I can kind of move willy-nilly, but if I hold down shift, it'll only let me move it in 45-degree increments, kind of like we talked about orthographic drawing styles in AutoCAD. So I can see it kind of auto snaps to the middle, which is this purple one. So that's how I know it's in the middle, but you can also use so now I know it's in the middle. An easy way to copy elements is to hold down the Alt button, click and drag, and I'm also holding down Shift, so again I'm moving it orthogonally because I want it to stay in line with each other. And I let go, and now I have a copy of that, which is much quicker than going to the text box, drawing a text box that you hope is the same size. It's a much more efficient and exact way of working. So again, I'm holding down the Alt button, and I'm on a Windows. This might be different for a Mac as well. Holding down Alt, clicking and dragging on the element I want to copy, and then holding down Shift so that I know it's moving orthogonally. So I'm going to drag that over there, right justify it, and then I'll just type something else School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And this is something that happens when your text overflows from the box you put it in, and when it doesn't have enough space, you'll get this little angry red plus sign at you. So you can just make your text box bigger, you can make your text smaller, it's up to you. InDesign also does this nice thing where it automatically spell checks you. So it's wondering what I'm trying to spell there. Institute of Chicago, there we go. School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Let's just do SAIC for short. Oops. Okay, so now in like 10-ish minutes, we've done a really basic border, some grid lines, and some text. So these are all really basic, important elements to composing and laying out your information. In this case, it's a map. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about this supporting text, but I am going to worry about this graphic scale. So I was mentioning this last class, but it's kind of hard to do a graphic scale when your paper size is not relevant or accurate. But in this case, we do have a paper size. If you remember, it's 17 by 11 inches. So we can make a scale. So, okay, so now I'm going to show you how to make a pretty basic graphic scale. I'm kind of cluttered on this page already, so I'm just going to go make a new page, and I can do that by going to my Pages tab at the top and clicking on this little button that says plus. You could also go to Layout, Pages, and then Add Page. So this just gives me more space to work. So we can see here in the example, they are using, I'm not sure what the scale is, but you can see they're using a white rectangle, black rectangle, white, black, white, black. So, for example, if I want to use my 1/4 of an inch equals a foot example again, I'll start with a rectangle, I'll make it black so we can see what's going on. And then over here in properties, I can see the exact measurements of this box. So, for example, I want this to be 0.5 inches wide, and let the height, let's say, 0.1. Let's do 0.2, that's too small. 0.2 inches. So then I'm going to use my copy trick. I'm going to hold down Alt, move this over. I'm holding Shift so I can only go orthogonally. And it should kind of snap right to the edge there nicely. Another one. Keep going like that. And then, as per the example, every other one is white. So I'll go over here, make these white, just like this. And then to get that border, I can do another box around this whole thing. It's not going to have a fill, but it will have a stroke, a black stroke, 1 point. Let's do 2 points. There we go. So now we can do some little text boxes here. So we know 1/4 of an inch equals a foot. So this is going to be a foot. I'm using you can use your arrow keys to bump things around. I think it's called bumping. I'm also going to center this so it's right on the line there. Whoops. Centered. Okay. Copy this over. This is 2 feet. This is 4 feet. If you wanted to get, is that right? 1, 2. No, that's not right. Hold on. Need one more. Extend this over a little bit. There we go. 1, 2, 4. So that's a pretty basic graphic scale. We also need a 0 feet. And something you can do to keep yourself organized is groups. So what I can do is select all of these by just clicking and dragging, and then I can do right click and say group, and now it'll move them in sync with each other since they're all nice and grouped. And to edit that group, you can just double click into it, and then you can edit the individual components. And you can just click out or hit escape to exit that group. Okay, so now I'm going to copy this, Control C, come back up to my First page, here we go. I'm using scroll to navigate. You can also use these pages panel. Just double click on the page you want to go to. If you're zoomed really far in, a trick that I like to use is Control-0. That'll kind of shrink the page to how much screen size you have. Okay, I'm going to hit Control-V, or you can go to Edit, Paste. So I can put my scale down here. Beautiful. I'm also going to write my scale, just for fun. So I can double click into this group, so I'm back in my group. I'll copy over one of these text boxes, expand it a little bit, and say scale is equal to, or we do this, semicolon scale is equal to 1/4 inch equals a foot. Ta-da! Now we have a nice scale. And you could argue that these grid lines are infringing on the readability of, oops. Oh, that must not have been grouped. Oh. So I've just realized that my scale is not in this group. I don't know what happened. So I'm going to do Edit, Cut. You can also do Control X, double click inside my group, and then paste into place. We'll put it exactly back where you took it from. Oh my gosh, isn't my grouping? So these didn't group for some reason, so I'm going to select them both. I'm holding Shift to select more than one thing, and then I'm just going to group them again and move these elements down a little bit so they fit into the corner nicely, just like this. And you could argue that these grid lines are kind of interfering with the readability of the scale information in the title. So what I'm going to do is make a white rectangle that kind of blocks those elements out from the grid or hides the grid. So I've just made a rectangle. I'm going to color it white here. And then obviously it's in front and it needs to be behind, so you can go to your layers. And here's the rectangle that we have selected. You can tell because this little blue box is selected. And you can just kind of move it down in the order until you get it where you want. So that's where I would like it. It's in front of all the lines, but behind the title and the scale. And also you're noticing probably that there's like blue border lines. How to get rid of those is to go to View, Overprint Preview, and this will get rid of those lines. You can see this white box is in front of my bold border, so I'm going to go to that rectangle, move it all the way to the top, and if you remember that rectangle is colored white, but we can select that rectangle and tell it that we do not want it to be colored by going to Properties, Fill, and then this little area that says None. So now our white box is behind the bold border and behind the title and the scale, but in front of the grid, so it's kind of masking those off. In the last part of this video, I'm going to show you how to import an image and export this whole document to a PDF or another image file. So when you first import it, it's going to let you see where you're placing it. So I just like to click somewhere in the upper left. Oh, here's something that happens a lot. So what just happened is it put it within this box. You see now the border and our map are connected. We do not want that, so I'm going to undo that. And that happened because I probably had the border selected, or I was clicking within it. So sometimes it's safer to just mouse outside of your page area and then put it in, and that usually works. So when you bring material in, the first thing I always like to do is select this box that says Auto Fit. If you do not select this, what will happen is you'll be able to adjust the frame of the image without actually adjusting it. So InDesign does this thing where every image or document that you import automatically has a frame set up versus what's inside of it. So you can think of the frame as like the container for the image, and then the image is separate. So for example, I can double click on this and then move the image without moving the frame. I can also move the frame without moving the image. So that's something that will take some getting used to. And I probably didn't explain it super well just now. But essentially I check auto fit, and then you don't really have to worry about that. Most of the things will move in unison automatically, and also when you scale, it'll scale them both at the same time, which is important. So I'm just going to fit this into our frame here. It might not fit exactly, but if it doesn't, I'll show you how to kind of adjust that. So here we go. I've made it a little bit bigger. I was holding down the shift button when I was scaling, just so it didn't get out of ratio. You can see if I'm doing something weird, it will automatically adjust the frame and what's inside so that it fits so it doesn't change the image, if that makes sense. So it's not warping the actual image, it's just warping the frame that it's in. So I want it to be pretty big, maybe give it a little bit of a breather from the grid. Obviously, this is a bad example because the grid is not, it doesn't mean anything in this example. The image is just kind of there for the purposes of having one. And then, again, I want to put it under my grid lines, so I'll put this layer at the bottom. Whoops, that was the wrong rectangle. Pretty cool map is going to go at the bottom. So the last thing I want to do, I want to put this under the grid lines, just like that. And there we have it. So lots of elements coming together. In this example, they don't necessarily relate to each other, but I just wanted to show you how to use some of the pretty basic tools of InDesign, and also force you to consider how you are graphically designing this map. I want you to think about your page size, your sporting text, your scale, all of those things, how they can all kind of come together harmoniously to convey your message, whatever that may be. So to export this, you can go to File, Export, here, and then you can export as a PDF, as a JPEG, PNG, whatever kind of fits your style. I would say for this project specifically, it doesn't really matter. So I'll save this as, of course, my cool map 1.0, and then you'll see a bevy of options here. I recommend you kind of comb through these. Just by default, they should all be pretty standard. You should just be able to hit export. It'll think for a second depending on how big your document is, and then it will save your document. So then now we can pop it open, and here we have our final product. So I hope that was useful. I definitely recommend you look online for more tutorials. Usually all the Adobe products have so many forums of people asking questions, so if you just Google your question, probably someone will have already asked it before and someone will have answered it before. But yeah, think about your composition, think about your proportions, think about which chart stuff elements you're using, be that title, scale, grid, all these things are important kind of contextual elements to conveying your story or your information. So I hope this was helpful, and I can't wait to see what you guys make. Goodbye.
Architecture. Architecture.